Hi everyone, Brian Wernham here, and today we're going to have a bit of interaction in this webinar. We've got two great speakers, one from National Audit Office, one from Government Accountability Office over in Washington. And all the way through we'll be taking your questions. On the right hand side, if you're using a PC or Mac, you'll see a dialog box. You'll be able to put in any questions that you have there and also be able to enter any text in for the competition for the book. And whether you're using a smartphone or a PC, you'll be able to take part in the online poll. So let's get going. So I'm the Deputy Chair of the Governance SIG of the Association for Project Management. And a few months ago we decided that we needed to do something on agile governance. That is, that we have a fairly good idea on how to run teams using agile methodologies now. I'll explain that a little bit later on for those people who aren't familiar with agile. But we've got much less idea of how to involve and engage with top management. And that's really what we want to do, is to develop some guidance on agile governance for top management. So what is agile? Just a little bit of framing here. A few people may not be aware. Back in 2001, a group of software developers got together in Snowbird, Colorado, and signed the Agile Manifesto. And they all represented different types of techniques and processes and approaches towards being agile and being able to develop effective software without using huge specifications, mainly focusing on prototyping and iterative development. And they decided that what was important was not so much the processes, but as you can see in the first line of this manifesto, that individuals and interactions take precedence over blindly following a process or adhering to a particular tool, no matter what. But we're interested in working product to be delivered and to be usable over having good plans and comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration and responding to change being the most important thing, rather than adversarial contract negotiation or, again, blindly following a plan. And there's a little codicil you could see at the bottom there to the Agile Manifesto that many people forget. That is, while we have value in the items on the right-hand side, we value items on the left more. So we're not throwing away processes, we're not throwing away documentation, we're not throwing away contracts, or we're not throwing away having good plans. We're just saying that we want to put a lot more focus on the things on the left-hand side. And there have been lots of different methods, which are in fact processes. So at the team level, Scrum has a lot to add. The project level, you may have heard of DSDM, which talks a lot more about framing of projects and making sure the outputs are going to be ready for use and prioritizing the outputs. Program level, we've got DAD, and portfolio level, we've also got the SAFE approach, Dean Leffingwell's approach. None of these tackle all of the other areas 100% because they're process-based. And if we look on the left-hand side again on the manifesto, let's remember this is all about individuals and interactions, not processes. So we're interested in not blindly following a process or blindly following a plan, but making sure that we've got stuff that really works out there and we're innovating effectively. So someone said to me, okay, give me a practical example. And last year we did a webinar on this where I talked through the case study in a lot of detail about the FBI. And this guy here on the left, Robert Hansen, who got arrested in 2001 for dumping some computer secrets on diskettes. And I don't think they had memory sticks then, or maybe they did, mainly diskettes. He dumped them underneath the bridge in exchange for $50,000, which some Russian spies had left for him at another location. He was arrested in the act of doing this, and he'd been under observation for some time. This wasn't the only case that the FBI had of broken systems and broken security, and it was their mainframe system and the business processes around it that were causing problems. And this is a really good business case. This isn't just a return on capital investment, this is making sure that secrets are safe. So they decided to build a new system and build new processes, and they gathered all their requirements, they analyzed them, designed them, and this is what we call a waterfall process. And they had their first project. And in this first project, they called the Virtual Case File Project. They spent 5 years actually, all the way through from 2001 all the way through to 2005, spent $300 million, and it got cancelled. They had lots and lots of paperwork, lots and lots of plans, but no working software. When they came to string the whole thing together, right at the end, you can see in this waterfall diagram on the left-hand side, testing comes really towards the end if you take this approach to its extreme. And they had taken this to its extreme. It looked good in process, it looked good in theory, but actually when it came down to it, it failed in practice. So they tried another project, taking into account all criticism of the first project from GAO and others. They instituted another monolithic design, even more so, with more checks, more controls, more planning, and that failed too. Also in a 5-year time period, cost a little bit more because they put so much money into oversight and assurance, but still followed this waterfall approach. So in 2010, after nearly a decade of no delivery and more of these problems happening, the Oklahoma City bomber, an attempted coup in the Philippines linked to data that had been leaked out of their mainframe systems by various unauthorized staff. They started again with Chad Fulgham, their new CIO, Chief Information Officer, the 6th one in 6 years, and he instituted a different approach. This is the agile approach. If you want to know the detail of this, have a look at my webinar from last year. But basically, the team was broken up into much smaller teams. These scrums here of about 7 or 8 people underneath a scrum of Scrum Master, and all with a lot of executive support. Team size went down from 200 to just 50 people. Productivity went up. Success. So by breaking things up so they're modular and incremental, in just 2 years and at just $99 million, which still sounds a lot, but okay, compare it with what had been wasted over the last 10 years, that's a big saving. So what do we mean by agile? What did Chad do in this particular example? Well, there's a whole series of different factors that went on. 2 which I outlined and went into more detail in the last webinar were that he was very incremental. Rather than just having releases of software every year, we're looking at releases of software every month or every 3 months. And also he had this trust throughout his whole team through this light, tight leadership approach. That is, tight leadership at the top so that management boards actually did their job in prioritizing work, and trust and light control at the bottom level. So when we talk about agile governance, I think we need to think about these sorts of factors. And also, in the second talk, in a few minutes, we're going to hear from Chris Battersby from the NAO, and then we're going to hear from Karen Richey from GAO, the Government Accountability Office in the US. And Karen's going to talk a little bit about using traditional project management over the top of Agile, in other words, looking at the releases of software as being control points that can still be into a Gantt chart, and maybe need to be in a Gantt chart for training and rollout purposes. But within each iteration of development, you might be running innovation projects. Not just software, but any sort of innovation. One of the case studies in my book is about hardware development for battle ID systems for the Ministry of Defence in the UK. So what we're doing in terms of the Agile Governance Guide, we're developing a new guide for next year, a slim guide, as you can see at the top there. We had a meeting in August, Ordnance Survey, and that's on the internet. At the moment, today we're doing this transatlantic webinar. Later on this month, we've got a meeting in the evening on the 25th at 1800 at Barclays, where we're going to be talking about agile business cases and a new version of DSDM. Other ways you can get involved, and some future sprints. Other ways you can get involved are by subtitling some of our videos in English, and also we have the emerging guide available on Google Docs. This webinar will be recorded, so you'll be able to have a look at it tomorrow and pick up these references, or send me an email, or Hannah at APM an email. I'll be able to send you the information. So, with no more ado, I will hand over to Chris, who's sitting next to me here. We're in Covent Garden in London, and the British Computer Society are presenting this. So I'll just hand over to Chris, and over to you.
Hi, Chris Battersby here from the National Audit Office in London. Just a very quick bit of background. What is the NAO? What do we do? The NAO is a totally independent body that reports to the Parliament, and we effectively help the nation spend wisely across the UK. And we publish a variety of reports. We publish traditional audit reports to check books balance, and we also publish what we call value for money reports, which is where there are sort of large expenditures in government. We investigate them, and we see whether the government is spending and investing wisely in the country. Now, I think it was in 2011, the UK government, in its IT strategy, took Agile on board as a recommended approach, and at the NAO we felt that we need to find out a bit more about Agile. So what we did was we went and spoke to people in the private sector, and we talked to a number of large and small companies to find out how they managed and governed agile projects. They tended to be, at the time, very much software front-end development projects, but to get an idea about what the sea change was in the way you could govern things from the very traditional ways that it existed up to now. And we pulled together 4 principles. Oh, by the way, the NAO report, you can Google it, you can download it, or you could buy a copy if you want paper, but I think we're all agile enough to be able to download and read. It's a rattling good read, and I think it's still very valid, although it's in agile terms it's now 3 years old, so many things have moved on. But what we found in our interviews and in our research there was that there are generally 4 principles of governance that are very important, and these are agile principles. The first thing is to make sure that when you're looking at programs, you focus on the behaviours, not just the processes. So you don't sit there and go through the risk register and through the Gantt charts. Observation is a very important tool, and it's observing agile programs actually working, the lifeblood of them, the life of them. Looking at communications, looking at the commitment of people, looking at how quality is handled, how prioritization is handled in development, and probably most importantly, looking at the value of the outputs, the outcomes, and the way people are understanding and delivering that value. And we also found from industry that people assessing really do need to have experience of delivery. So it isn't a bit of desk research. This is people who know, which stones to lift up on the programs to find out what's lying underneath them. People who can spot the things that are missing as well as the things that are there. The second principle we found is around behaviours, and everybody needs to collaborate in delivering quality in agile programs. And the first big learning from this is that senior management and people right across the board need to agree the quality of service up front. So you need, before each delivery of a capability, each sprint, each delivery of a product, you need to know how you're going to measure good. You need to define done before you start. It's not good enough to say it'll be all right on the night. And you need that consensus, and it needs to be in language people understand. And the second point on collaboration is you need to continually be reviewing feedback. The governors aren't there just as gatekeepers. I think a lot of programs still need gate reviews, but you need to be seeing how things are continually developed. The next principle, principle number 3, is that the teams need to decide metrics and to self-monitor these metrics. And this isn't an excuse for the anarchy you sometimes see in agile projects. You need to get the metrics right. You won't get them right on day one, but you need to have a process where you are continually improving. You're failing early with your metrics. You're finding the right measures for your programs. And in doing that, you improve the certainty. You don't have the old certainties of delivery on time, on budget, Gantt chart, 90% finished stuff. You have to develop your new certainties, and those certainties have to be relevant both to the people on the ground delivering, but also to the people who are governing, the senior people, the people who are investing their money and their careers in these programs. And finally, as with everything you do in Agile, and this is back to the lean origins of Agile, is only govern if it brings value and doesn't introduce delays. So for Agile programs, you need to sweep away the old, spend your Thursday evening writing the agenda for the Friday project meeting, spend all Friday in the project meeting, spend Friday afternoon and evening writing up the minutes. Only do things if they add value, and that means you need to have a light touch in the way you govern, and you also have to make sure you're looking forward and not backwards. This is the sort of leading and lagging indicators, and you need to, again, have that focus on the value being delivered. So this is our research from industry, And these are the 4 principles. That was really what we found in 2012 when we looked out there. And we're now checking the relevance of these in government projects. Now they're taking off, and probably refining them to help us in our audit and our value for money views of programs, but also I think to help government themselves and to be more proactive with them in government. 2012, that's a long time ago, and several things have happened since, which I'd like to open up for debate and to get your feedback on the way things are moving. The first observation is that Agile is now mainstream and people know how to do Scrum sprints. It's taken off. When I say mainstream, I mean it's certainly out there in the market, and it's becoming mature. The second point of discussion really is that the old certainties that were there and that were very relevant, and many of them are still relevant, and the structures that have been developed over the last 20 years, many of them by government and applied in the private sector, such as print and MSP, managing successful programs, have a place, but they don't always fit Agile well. So the old days of requirement specs, full business cases, etc., are not as relevant and useful, and we need to look at better ways of inventing the new certainties. The next point, close to everybody's heart at the moment, I think, is as Agile moves away from the purely software and largely web front-end type software development, it's moving to looking at business transformation. And although some areas of change are applying Agile, it's still got a long way to go. And we're finding when we're looking at, even in the private sector, leading companies, that good case studies where Agile has moved up to business transformation are difficult to find. So again, if you can feed us back any case studies, we'll be very, very grateful. And the last point I'd like to make is that there are some ideas emerging. First of all, we're finding there are new roles, and looking at the way UK government, the Government Digital Service, is developing Agile. These cross-cutting roles are becoming important and useful, and they're emerging certainly within the UK. We're finding that there's a need for hybrid approaches. Not everything can be done in an Agile way. There will be constraints, contractual constraints sometimes, that mean that you don't always have a green field to work in. So you need to have a hybrid approach that still gives you as much certainty as possible and still gives you the agility and the ability to move forwards. Value assurance and compliance. For many years, I think governments have seen itself as being there to assure compliance to a methodology. Governance now needs to also look at value and value delivered. I think it's the fourth time I mentioned the word value, but it's so important as part of an Agile program. And the final point is that the way governments procure solutions, change, IT, consultants, whatever, needs to change. It needs to be more Agile to reflect the flexibility, but also to incorporate the rigor needed for good Agile program delivery. So a very quick summary is that 2 years ago we looked at Agile in the private sector. We produced a review and produced these 4 guidelines. Now I think we need to build this out. There's a realization that there's if not a new approach, a continuation or growth of Agile governance is needed to take in the need to govern Agile business transformation, digital business transformation. It's not about IT, it's about people change. Of course it has a large IT part, the money gets spent on IT, but we need to develop new models and sets of principles so that we have a much more holistic approach to the governance of change, investment and programs.
I was at a project management conference giving a talk, and I was talking about failing fast being a good thing. And from half the audience, there was a sharp intake of breath. the idea of failure being a complete anathema. But from the other half of the audience thinking, yeah, of course, if something isn't going to work,
yeah,
change it or stop it, don't continue.
For our American listeners, I think Michael Jordan said he didn't just score 1,000 goals in basketball or whatever, he missed 10,000 shots, but he learned from those. Thomas Edison didn't invent the light bulb first time, but he had a very structured way of failing to invent the light bulb until he actually succeeded in doing it.
Good morning, this is Karen Richey. I'm from the Government Accountability Office, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing with scheduling in an agile setting. So the GAO is the counterpart to the National Audit Office, so we do the same thing that group does over in London. What we do is we're independent, and we basically provide Congress with audit evaluations and investigative inquiries into different programs, and our group covers the entire federal government. So we do not only Department of Defense audits, but we also do everything from the Federal Aviation Administration to IT implementation, construction of buildings, and just about anything that our government pays for, the Federal Highway Administration, it's a whole bunch of audits. And our team right now is responsible for looking at 55 different audits, so we are really, really busy. We are headed by a Comptroller General, which is it's a presidential appointment, and it's a 15-year term. So that person is in charge of the GAO and kind of running the direction of how the audits will go for quite a long period of time. So we're under the leadership of Jean Dodaro at this moment right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about scheduling today and what we've been doing on our side as far as best practices, and how we have realized that IT is moving in this newer direction of doing Agile, and how that kind of changes things in relation to our best practices. So I'm going to walk you all through this in the next few slides. So what is a schedule? One of the things that we do in our group is we do performance assessments of programs, both cost, schedule, and also looking at earned value management if the programs are using that as a measurement tool. And so a schedule is very important to all of those. It basically underpins a cost estimate, because the longer a program lasts, the more time and money it's going to cost. And we saw that in the example of the virtual case file in the FBI. Twice trying to attempt getting this system up and running and spending $700 million and really getting nowhere. So a schedule is what people use to monitor progress. It kind of lays out the map of what's going to be done, and provides target dates to get activities completed. And it's also a tool for measuring performance, so you can actually look at variances between what you thought you could finish by a certain date and what it actually took to get it done. And of course, again, time is money. There is a burn rate associated with people working on a project, so the longer it takes to get a project completed, the more it's going to end up costing. So scheduling is very, very much tied to costs, and at GAO we've taken a big interest in scheduling and looking at that. So one of the things we've done is back in 2007 we came up with a best practices guide. It was the GAO cost assessment, estimating and assessment guide. And this is the criteria that we use in our audits. So when we go in to look at a program and we look at its cost estimate, we have to have criteria to say, what should a cost estimate look like? What's a good cost estimate comprised of? And so our GAO cost guide outlines those best practices. And as we started to apply the best practices in the cost guide and got more into scheduling, we realized how poorly government agencies were doing scheduling, that they really didn't have a clue on how to do this, and we decided that we were going to do an appendix to the cost guide to put more information on scheduling. But after the appendix was over 100 pages long, because it required so much education in how to do critical path method scheduling, we decided that maybe this should be its own guide on its own. And so we worked with a bunch of experts on, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the presentation, to get feedback from them about what made sense to put in the schedule guide and what kind of best practices, and we came up with a draft report in 2012. And it's out there on the web. You can get it for free, download the PDF version. And we're in the process right now of updating it because we put it out as an exposure draft and left it open for comment. And we have received a lot of comments on this schedule guide, and not just both in the United States, but just worldwide. We've gotten a lot of input from members in the UK as well as Japan, Indonesia, several other countries. So the schedule guide is going to be just like the GAO cost guide. It's been vetted through a group of over 900 experts, and it's going to contain what we consider best practices worldwide to doing scheduling. And what we find value in both our cost and schedule guides is for agencies that don't really have policies or guidance on how to do cost estimating or scheduling, they can actually use our guide to help them do this type of work, because they're going to see transparently the criteria we're using, which are the best practices, and so they can actually reverse engineer that and make it their own policy or guidance on how to do cost and scheduling for their own agencies and their own projects. So as we were going forward doing our audits, we were noticing that we're a little bit more behind you all in the UK and the United States, but we were noticing more and more projects were doing Agile and the Agile development method. And so when we would go in to do the audit, we'd ask them to give us a copy of their schedule so we could take a look at the plan that they had in place to do this. And we found that many of the projects that were using the Agile method did not have a schedule for their project. And they said, we're doing Agile, we don't need a schedule. And so we got a little concerned because we thought, well, just because you're using this approach does not mean that you shouldn't have an overall plan. Software is just a portion of an overall program, and there's many other pieces that have to fit together. And so we decided that as we were updating the schedule guide to incorporate all the comments we received, that we needed to actually include an appendix that dealt with this Agile method. And so one of the things that this appendix is going to do is talk about some of the misconceptions about scheduling for projects that are using the Agile method, and show how the best practices for scheduling still apply. And the whole key point is that Agile measures progress through the implementation of working software. So there are a lot of metrics and a lot of data that should be gathered if you're doing Agile correctly that we can use in our best practices audits to ensure that it's being done the right way. So our best practices for scheduling are pretty straightforward. Basically, the first thing you need to do is capture all the activities of what you need to do and then sequence them with logic, showing what has to happen before something can begin. So putting in the predecessors and successors, which then create your scheduled network. Another thing is assigning resources to activities so that people are accountable to get the work done, and you can also attach dollars to that, which means you can actually resource load your schedule and manage your cost estimate within a schedule setting. And then, of course, determining the duration for the activities will actually be what you need to come up with a finish date. So you need all that information to be able to see when you're going to start and when you should finish. And then verifying the schedule can be traced horizontally and vertically. Horizontally means everything's tied together with logic. So if a activity gets extended and it takes longer to get done, it will automatically push all the following activities out because of the logic. So it will just update itself automatically. Vertically means that you may have many layers to your schedule, so you'll have very detailed information at the lowest level and then roll it up to higher and higher levels, eventually just getting to high-level milestones that might be briefed to management, and looking for the traceability between the lower schedules and how they actually match up to what's being briefed to management. Then confirming that the critical path is valid. We know that all software programs for scheduling will calculate a critical path, but many times we find that the critical path that has been identified isn't really a valid critical path, and that could be because of missing logic. It could be because there's too many constraints in the schedule, causing things to look critical that really aren't pushing out the end date. And then ensuring reasonable total float. That's important because float is where management has trade-offs. They can look at activities that have a lot of time and resources and say, you know what, these people can wait, let's move them over here to the more high-risk stuff that needs to get done. Analysis of schedule risk, again, is a method that you can do both for cost estimating and scheduling. and it allows you to do a simulation of all the different what-if possibilities of risks affecting the schedule, and allows you to come up with a probability of completion and what date to have you picked and what's the probability that you can actually hit that date. And then the ninth best practice is updating the schedule using actual progress and logic. We do find that many schedules are started but never used to manage the program, so you've got a schedule that's completely out of date with what's being done. And then the 10th best practice, we didn't have it in the original draft because we just assumed everybody did this, but as we move forward in our audits, we realized that people weren't maintaining a baseline schedule, which is basically when you come up with your original schedule, you kind of lock it down and set a baseline and then measure variances against that. And we were finding a lot of people didn't even have a baseline schedule to do that. So moving into the Agile world and what's got to change or what's got to be considered if a program is using Agile, we really worked a lot with experts that had a lot of experience in doing the Agile development method and said, what makes sense here? I mean, we still think that a schedule's needed, but obviously there's got to be kind of a break point where the scheduling best practices make sense and then where you kind of abandon those scheduling best practices at lower levels. And so what we've decided, working with the experts, is that overall for a program using the Agile approach, there should be a roadmap with basic features, must-haves, should-haves, could-haves, nice-to-haves. So this is your prioritization of your different requirements. But that the schedule itself, where you actually would have the logic in place, would not go any deeper than the release level. So the release will just be a big bar of time that will show a set of features that you expect to get done in that release and how many sprints maybe are under that release. But other than that, that's where it would stop. Because at this point there's more data and metrics that are being done in the Agile method that will give you better insight into scheduling than actually doing it in a Microsoft project or a Primavera type software program. The next best practice for sequencing all activities, we know that the whole premise behind Agile is that you actually fix time and that your trade-off comes in what you actually can deliver within that time frame. So sequencing the activities below the release level, once you get into sprints, it doesn't really make any sense because you're always going to finish that sprint in that time frame. The difference is what are you going to actually get done during that sprint. And there should be a steady team that's always doing the work and they get better over time. So again, we would say that only the best practices would apply at the release level and above, and that below the release in the sprint area that there's other metrics like the daily stand-up meetings, and you can look at completed stories and burn down charts. And that basically the whole purpose of Agile is to let the team self-organize, so just leave them alone. Do not make them have to report scheduling status all the way up the chain. Assigning resources to all activities, again, since the development team is usually stable and self-organizing, there's no need to do any resource loading of activities at the sprint level. And the team size, though, should be small, between 5 to 9 people per sprint, but there could be several sprints working in parallel on a specific feature or different features to get done within a release. And then the duration of all activities, one of the best practices we have is that near-term work is broken down into no longer than about 2 reporting periods, so 44 days. And that's because you don't want to have big, long spans of time because it becomes too difficult to manage and status. But of course, because the sprint is fixed, and it's usually fixed at about a 2-week time frame, it means that it doesn't make any sense of tracking this in the schedule. So basically, we realize that if it's an Agile program and you're only showing in a schedule the releases, that you are going to be longer than those probably 44 days that we use as a benchmark, and that's okay because there should be other methods that are being used below the release level to track progress in the project. And then best practice 5, the horizontal and vertical. The horizontal integration, we really like the Kanban boards and how you can go to that and look at what's happening. It shows what work is being planned, what's underway, what's been accomplished. So below the release level, there's other tools and methods that that Agile programs use, and we think that's just perfectly fine. And so we just want to make the reader and the auditor aware that you need to kind of look for other artifacts and other information that can give you the same information that a schedule could. And then vertical integration, again, the sprint burn down charts should be used to help convey to management what's happening in the project so that this information gets fed up and gets pulled into the release information that then goes to the higher level schedules. For best practice 6 is the critical path valid. Again, the must-haves should be identified in the schedule, so we should be knowing what must-haves are in what releases, so then we can then identify how that work's getting done, because that is the work that cannot be traded off. Anything below the must-haves can be traded off, and they can be used to you know, help bring schedule back in or finish things on time if you can't elongate a release. And again, there's also the user stories for each sprint that you can use to determine if these features are actually getting accomplished. Reasonable total float, again, that would only happen at the release level, so all of that kind of goes away once you're in the sprint level on down. For conducting a schedule risk analysis, we still think that there's value in doing that in an agile setting. Of course, this would happen at the release level and above, and it would happen for any of the other things outside the software development, such as the procurement of hardware, you know, any of the types of other support activities that have to happen to support the software development. But we realize that one of the benefits of Agile is that it is a tool for managing schedule. It's trying to bring things in, get things done in smaller pieces so that the risk is a lot less. You don't have these long durations of trying to get requirements written, and then you have this big integration and testing effort. It's happening in a much smaller time frame and smaller loops, so that when there are failures, you can actually do root cause analysis and get them fixed pretty quickly. And then best practice 9, updating the schedule using actual, progress, and logic. Again, actuals would be fed up to the release level, so you would be tracking the completion of features and user stories. But once you get to the sprint level on down, there's the other methods like the burn down or the burn up charts, and looking at the velocity of the team and are they able to hit their target goals. And then finally, maintaining a schedule baseline. Again, because you fix time and use a steady team, the baseline at below the release in the sprint level, it just doesn't make any sense that there's other means and methods for doing that. And then finally, if anybody is interested in being a part of our expert group, we meet twice a year, and we actually have our next meeting coming up on September 23rd. We do allow people to call in, and we provide toll-free lines for international callers. So even though it would be nighttime for you guys in the UK, you're welcome to listen in. If it's not something you can make because it's evening and you've got plans, you can still get on our list and you'll get our detailed minutes, and you'll be able to see what the discussion is. And this meeting coming up on the 23rd, we're talking a lot about Agile. So if anybody's interested, email me and I'll send you the agenda. And if you're interested in calling in, we can send you the dialing instructions. And with that, I'm all done. Thank you.
We've had lots of entries for the competition come in. So what are agile behaviours? And we've got a suggestion from Chris that bosses should be holding stand-up meetings rather than just asking for status reports. David says that project boards should be empowered to make decisions without having to refer upwards to even larger project boards. John says collaborative targets rather than competitive targets with joined up accountability that's aligned. Kelly says you've got to be flexible, adapt quickly to change, and work in the most effective way. And having changes approved by a product owner without having to go through a full impact analysis and the change control board, says Sarah. Is Agile an excuse for failing to properly document requirements?
Actually, you know what? This is something, it's on our agenda to discuss at our expert meeting on the 23rd. So it's something that we are going to definitely ask the experts about as far as what type of documentation is needed, because we do know that when teams are doing Agile, they get the user story done, they complete it, they do the demo, and then they do a retrospective, and then they kind of just start pulling more work from the backlog. So I don't really have the answer for you right now, but we are going to discuss it at our expert meeting. So I would definitely get on our list to get feedback or listen in yourself during the meeting.
And Chris, what do you think about this? Do you think some teams are just using Agile as an excuse for anarchy, avoiding documentation that should be done anyway.
There's always the argument from agile to fragile, which has caused, which will continue to cause problems, and there's also my argument that there's good project and program management, bad project and program management. So I think the learnings we have is that the documentation needs to be right, and it needs to be understood, and it needs to be consistently communicated, and it usually needs to be consistently refined. So it's getting it right. It's not a matter of lots or little. And I think people are maturing more to say it's not like the old days of rapid application development where you would build a house of cards and then hope it worked. This is about incremental development, it's about incremental learning. And yes, you need documentation, and yes, if you don't write anything down, you probably will fail.
Karen, over in the States, how do you see project boards or program boards, steering groups interacting with projects and programs and with Agile?
Well, one of the things that we did to prepare ourselves for the Agile Guide was to actually go and shadow a team that was doing Agile at the USCIS, and we did that for a week, and it was very interesting. We actually watched daily stand-up meetings. We went to the Kanban board. We attended a retrospective. We watched a demo with all the stakeholders, and we thought it was really good. It was very well done. The team had been doing this for a while, so of course it did take a while for them to kind of get their groove, and they did have a Scrum Master, and they had a lot of people in coaching them. But we definitely see the value in using Agile, and think that the management actually, I think it takes a little while for them to buy in that this is actually going to work. But once they start to see the working software and they get an opportunity to make changes and say, you know, now that I see this, I actually would really like this done. Is it possible? And then they add it to the backlog. I think it definitely is a better approach than trying to do the big bang, trying to get everything, you know, figure out everything you want all at once when you can't even tangibly see it or understand what it's going to do. And also the fact that you can get this done so quickly, you can keep pace with the changing of technology. So we definitely think that management, once they see it and get some comfort with it, they buy into it pretty quickly. But it is a huge culture change.
So Chris, do you think, picking up on Karen's point there, do you think we're going to see project boards looking at stuff that works rather than looking at project status reports?
I think they already are, and it's that inclusion and involvement that is important. And if you think of the traditional reasons for project failure, lack of stakeholder engagement, lack of management understanding engagement has always come pretty top of the list. So the inclusion and the involvement and the being able to see things is very important. But you need to have something to show people, and in many, again, when we're looking at moving this away from the traditional, well, say traditional agile front-end web development to looking more at business transformation and at things that are happening in the bowels of an organization, that is going to be difficult to have something to show every 2 weeks. You can show them a web screen every 2 weeks, and it has helped, and people do understand more, and you get better feedback and inclusion. But we have to think about how we're going to get that with bigger transformations and more complex things.
How do agile projects break activities down into the smaller amounts done within each sprint? Okay, so at the beginning of every sprint or iteration of work, which might just be a couple of weeks long, or fortnight as we like to call it in England, or maybe a month long, a bit longer, or maybe a bit shorter, a week long, the team work on something, and then at the end of that sprint they then have it ready. And quite often, of course, they run out of time, so what they do is they focus on what's really important within that sprint, and they sacrifice those things, which is just what we would call the bells and whistles, the optional accessories. And one approach towards doing this is to have a Moscow list, that is must-haves, should-haves, could-haves, and won't-haves. So you have a list of all the things that you could do in a sprint, and the team are given very clearly a list of business priorities, and that's done through, in Scrum at least, that's done through the product owner. And then the team get to work, and depending on what velocity they achieve during that sprint, they get a certain amount of that work done, and they deliver it just in that JP Morgan quote, have it ready on Thursday, not perfect. So they don't try and work through the entire list of requirements, but they do so in a prioritized way. I think, Karen, you were talking a few seconds ago, weren't you, about prioritized lists and having must-haves identified. Who do you see as identifying the must-haves? Is there one person who can make that decision on a project?
Well, for the project that we kind of shadowed, it was really a group of stakeholders. It was several of them that were in that meeting together, and it was, what was nice about it is because they had the demo and they could see things right there, they were able to discuss amongst themselves you know, as far as there wouldn't be competing requirements because everybody was in the room together. So even if one group wanted, you know, a pull-down menu with this option on it, another group might say, but we need it this way. So it was great to see everybody in there together saying, well, how can we fix this? How can we do this, you know, so that everybody's satisfied? And I think that's one of the benefits of Agile is it just pulls everybody together. It makes them all come together. They're actually seeing something real. It's not conceptual. It's not where I'm thinking this way, you're thinking this way. We're actually seeing it on the screen, and the developers are there, so they're getting a better understanding.